FedEx today employs over 500,000 people, has a market cap of over $40 billion, and delivers millions of packages every day across the world. But in the early 1970s, this entire empire depended on one man, $5,000, and a weekend in Las Vegas. Chapter 1. The Vision. Frederick Wallace Smith, founder of FedEx, did not get off to a good start in life. At age 4, his father passed away. For the first 10 years of his life, Fred suffered from a childhood disease called Perthes disease that affected his hips and his ability to walk. He spent his early years in leg braces, using crutches, and facing bullying from other kids. But by his 10th birthday, Fred had overcome it. He learned to walk again, and soon developed a deep love for flying that would shape his entire future. In high school, Fred started his first business, a small record company founded with friends in a garage. He left it behind in 1962 to attend Yale University and study economics. In his junior year, Fred wrote a term paper proposing a revolutionary business idea. At the time, packages across the US were shipped in the cargo holds of passenger airlines, making delivery slow and unpredictable. Fred's idea was to buy a fleet of jets, fly at night when airports were quiet, sort all packages at one central hub, and deliver them by truck. He believed this system could get packages delivered within just 1 to 2 days. His professor gave him a C grade and told him the idea would never work. Fred was disappointed but stayed convinced. After graduating in 1966, he joined the US Marine Corps and served 2 tours in Vietnam as a navigator. During his time in the military, he closely studied how the armed forces handled logistics and saw many inefficiencies in how supplies were moved. In his spare time in the barracks, he played blackjack constantly and became known as an exceptionally skilled player. He had no idea at the time that this card game would one day save his company. Chapter 2. Federal Express is born. After leaving the Marines in 1970, Fred was determined to build something meaningful. At age 26, he joined his father-in-law's aviation business, bought a controlling interest, and began planning his shipping idea in earnest. He designed a hub and spoke system using non-passenger planes to carry packages to a central sorting facility, which would then send them out on separate routes for truck delivery. He calculated he needed 14 jets to get started. Fred secured around $91 million in loans and venture capital from investors impressed by his detailed knowledge of the airline industry. His original plan was to partner with the Federal Reserve to speed up check delivery, which at the time could take up to 10 days. The Fed agreed. Fred bought his aircraft, and he named the company Federal Express in their honor. Then the Federal Reserve suddenly backed out of the deal entirely. Fred was left with planes, debt, and a company name but no client. He pivoted quickly and focused instead on shipping urgent small packages for businesses and consumers. On April 17, 1973, Federal Express officially launched from Memphis, Tennessee. On the very first night, 14 planes delivered 186 packages to 25 US cities. The dream was finally real, but a disaster was coming. Chapter 3. The Crisis. Almost immediately after launch, the 1973 oil crisis hit. OPEC placed an oil embargo on the United States, and fuel prices quadrupled almost overnight. For a company running a fleet of jets, this was devastating. FedEx was losing around $30,000 every single day. Over the first 26 months of operation, total losses reached approximately $29 million. Fred asked employees to delay cashing their paychecks to keep the company alive. Pilots and drivers used their personal credit cards for fuel and hoped to be reimbursed. Fred stopped taking any salary at all, but it was still not enough. The company was down to its last $5,000 in the bank when a fuel bill for $24,000 arrived, due by Monday. It was a Friday. In one final attempt, Fred flew to meet with General Dynamics and pitched them an emergency investment. He dressed in his best suit and walked into that meeting believing it could save everything. General Dynamics said no. Sitting alone in an airport lounge in Chicago, Fred felt completely defeated. He thought about his 389 employees, all about to lose their jobs. He thought about his economics professor, who had been right all along. Once he got back to Memphis, he would have to shut it all down. And then he gave himself a pep talk. He reminded himself who he was, a man who had beaten a crippling childhood disease, a man who survived 2 tours in Vietnam, a man who had built something real from nothing. If banks and investors would not save his company, he would save it himself. Fred did not board his flight home. Instead, he withdrew the last $5,000 from the company bank account and booked a flight to Las Vegas. Chapter 4. The Gamble. Fred headed straight to the blackjack tables. In the 1970s, some casinos used only a single deck of cards, which made card counting possible and gave skilled players a small but real statistical edge. Fred had spent years developing exactly this skill during his time in the military. Still, it was gambling. His winnings went up and down all weekend. At one point, he was up to $35,000 and felt unstoppable. Then a run of bad hands brought him back down. He stayed focused and disciplined, knowing everything was riding on this. When the weekend was over, Fred had turned $5,000 into $27,000. He stopped, walked away from the table, deposited the money into the FedEx bank account, and flew home. It was enough to pay the fuel bill and keep the planes flying for one more week. Chapter 5. The recovery Fred's team was shocked when they heard what he had done, but his reasoning was simple. The company was already finished without that fuel payment, so he genuinely had nothing to lose. The gamble bought him just enough time. Within weeks, Fred secured $11 million in new investment. Federal Express had its first profitable year in 1976. While competitors were cutting costs and playing it safe, Fred doubled down on marketing and advertising, growing FedEx's brand and market share rapidly. By 1976, FedEx was moving 19,000 parcels per day and had attracted major clients including IBM and the US Air Force. Chapter 6. Deregulation and expansion. The next obstacle was government regulation. Existing laws gave major commercial airlines a monopoly on heavier cargo, and FedEx was legally limited to carrying no more than 7,500 pounds per plane. This kept FedEx locked into small aircraft and severely restricted growth. Fred joined with other small carriers and spent years lobbying Congress for change. In 1978, President Jimmy Carter signed the Airline Deregulation Act, removing the weight restrictions and giving FedEx the freedom to fly any size aircraft it could afford. That same year, FedEx went public on the New York Stock Exchange, raising further funds for expansion. New hubs opened across the country and bigger planes entered the fleet. The 1980s brought explosive growth. By 1981, FedEx was the largest air freight company in the United States. They became the first US company to use computers to track packages internally. By 1983, annual revenue crossed $1 billion. By 1984, they were shipping to Europe and Asia. By the end of the decade, FedEx was operating in 90 countries on every continent. In the 1990s, FedEx pioneered online package tracking, letting customers follow their deliveries via the internet. By the end of the decade, it was the #1 overnight shipping service in the world. FedEx continued acquiring companies, including a $2.4 billion purchase of Kinko's in 2004, expanding its services far beyond simple package delivery. Today, FedEx operates over 700 planes, making it one of the largest airlines on Earth by fleet size. Fred Smith became a multi-billionaire and remains the company's largest individual shareholder. Not bad for a business idea that once received a C grade.